G'day subscribers. Today we're going to Jive talk about body tags on an FJ Holden. You're with Jules Knight on Jive Talking Garage. Well, today what we're going to do is Jive talk about the tags that we find on an FJ, and I can only talk about FJ, really, because we've had some questions from new members. Now, there is a couple of places on an FJ where you'll find the details for the car, and the first one is on the driver's side. Well, the first one I'm going to talk about anyway is on the driver's side. And it is a welded tag that is between the two bolts that hold the front cross member. So that's the front end. So in between those two bolts, on the continuation of the chassis rail underneath the apron panel, so that's near the petrol pump on a car, the fuel pump, you'll actually see a welded tag with 3 bits of information, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And this will show you what they look like and where it is. Okay, so the example I've used is 4.4403.B. That was my ute. So the 4 is meaning the first digit before the dot is saying it was manufactured, it was put together, assembled in 1954. And the second number is the number sequentially that it was assembled. And the B is saying which capital city, so B in this case for Brisbane, it's saying which capital city the complete knockdown kit was actually put together and ready for sale. So 4.4403 is 1954, number 4403, made in Brisbane. Now, what I've also done there is shown the Brisbane factory. It was in Wickham Street. Had a turntable inside of it, but it was really an assembly factory. So motors and gearboxes and a lot of mechanical things like that were constructed at the foundries in Fisherman's Bend. A lot of body works were conducted in South Australia, for instance. I'll talk panel vans or wherever. They're all different places, and some of it's in the Holden Master Parts catalogue, and we'll try and talk about that in a moment. But the next thing to talk about is the body tag, and this will show you where the body tag is on the firewall on the passenger side. So, you know, when you open the bonnet, it'll be on your right, and it'll be under the windscreen in the engine bay compartment in front of where the passenger sits. Okay, so that has a nice big red circle around it to give you a bit of an idea where it is. And that'll have a whole series of numbers on there. And it's codes, really. It's codes. So in that perspective, for an FJ, you'll have an FJ 215, which is a standard sedan, an FJ 217, which is a business sedan. So that was a beefed up version for country salespeople or taxis, for instance. Now, with the FJ compared to the 48215, they, as in when I say they, I mean in General Motors, they introduced a more glamorous model or a variation of the standard sedan, and that was called the Special, the FJ225, and that's stamped on that little ID plate, excuse me, that sits on the dash. Now, the next cab off the rank is the FJ2104, which is a panel van, which is really a FJ Ute with a lid on it. And the FJ Utility is the FJ2106. Now, with these body tags, you could actually see a different variation of that, and that was as a spare part. Now, for instance, and this is in the Accelerator magazine, and also I found it in 10.002, actually in the Master Parts catalog. There's a whole section on it which has got spare body shells. So, for instance, if your car was in an accident, they could, General Motors could supply a new body cell, be it a sedan, a ute, or a panel van. And in some instances, it would be less the end gate. Wow. Less the deck lid for 48217, FJ217, FJ Standard, FJ Special, the 50206, which is the 48 Ute, the FX Ute, let's call it what we'll know it as, and also the other variations. So that on this one is on page 10-7, but it all falls under body shell in primer, so it comes painted in undercoat. Under body shell, so 10.002. Look, that's really terrific. Okay, so you will also have their the paint code, and like in my case, it's Ocean Mist Green. In the previous case for me, it was Calamine Blue, and Holden really had some beautiful colors. Like with Calamine Blue, you know, if I parked next to a green car, it looked blue. If I parked next to a blue car, it looked green. So just lovely colors. So that was what they were doing with body shells, and with the body shell, they would actually stamp the part number into the body tag. Excuse me. And the other thing that they would do is there's like it says ACC for like accessory, for instance. In some American cars, they really stamp all the accessories that are fitted to the car, but in Holden's case, they didn't. And earlier on, that would be used to designate what month of the year the car was manufactured. They stopped doing it after a while. However, that was how they would do it. So I just want to show you that body tag. Okay, so I've gone to the book, and what I'd like to do is talk about each of the factories at the States, and then I'll come back and talk about Brisbane, because I've driven past it many times. So in my ute, for instance, I've taken the ute to the factory where it was finally put together, and also 400 metres down the road to Eagers, where it was sold from on the 29th of April 1954. So what was happening in Queensland is from early years, like in the 1930s, for instance, General Motors had a factory. When I say factory, I mean it's like an assembly factory in Fortitude Valley. So that's a very, very close, inner city suburb that was actually owned by Charles Windmill originally, one of the Brisbane settlers, on my mother's family, on her side. So I think it was her great-great-grandfather, and he also donated the land to the cathedral. So I would go there and have a look. And you could see above the factory the Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, Holden, whatever else they had there, and you could see, you know, where they were making them. Okay, so if we go, so how this worked was, not every one of the state's factories built the car from scratch. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So, for instance, South Australia, they did body assembly. So that's putting all of the panels together, welding them, assembling them, framing them. So it's body assembly and vehicle assembly. So that was done in South Australia. In Queensland, it was just vehicle assembly. So everything was sent here and they put it together. Victoria, it was both engine assembly and vehicle assembly. Not body assembly, vehicle assembly. Western Australia, same as Queensland, vehicle assembly. New South Wales, body assembly and vehicle assembly. So this is on page A7 of the Master Parts Catalogue. So that information's there. Okay, so in my case, for my car, it was shipped to Brisbane. And it just so happened that two things happened. Okay. The first factory was at Fortitude Valley. Okay. And then when the EH later on was being manufactured, they moved the factory to Acacia Ridge, which is on the south side of Brisbane, probably, I'm not going to say how many kilometres or miles, but look, it's probably half an hour from the centre of the city. However, I was talking to one of my wife's friend's father, and we're going to call him Ray because that's his name. And I was chatting to him about, he called it the Light Street Factory. So it's on Wickham Street. Excuse me. And it has a train track running just near it. And we were having a Chinese dinner one night. And so this is my wife's friend who she's known since 1990, and it's 2021 now. I've met her father on a few occasions, and he's always been a pretty quiet fella, but he sort of opened up, and we sort of found a few common subjects to talk about. One of them was cars. And then he started talking about Holdens, so I could talk about Holdens without being too elaborate about it. And I was asking him what he was doing and what happened and how things were done. And he was saying to me, oh, well, yeah, look, and he called it Light Street because that must be the crossroad. Light Street, excuse me, bus depot. And because that's exactly where the train came through on the way through to Newstead. And so that's where the Holden assembly factory was. So I started talking to him about it. And he said, oh, well, they used to bring the bodies. The bodies were originally stored because they didn't have room at Acacia Ridge. So I'm thinking, okay, well, that's most probably, and let's face it, there's no one around now to ask, you know, who's going to tell you? The bodies were stored at Acacia Ridge. And then I remember Dad as a kid driving me past Acacia Ridge, and it was on a train line. And I'm thinking, train line at point A, train line at point B. I can see where this is going. And then he said to me, yeah, what they would do is they'd put them on the train at Acacia Ridge, and then they would send them into Fortitude Valley, and they'd be taken off the dollies at Fortitude Valley, and then they would start to be assembled in the Wickham Street factory. And I said, oh, how do you know that? He said, oh, I used to take them off. I was one of the workers there that actually did that. He said, I started at Eagers first, and then I went to Holden's. And I thought, wow, you don't know what you don't know. So it was really interesting to talk to him, let me just say respectfully, it was nice to talk to an old timer and just shut up and listen, because they've just got so much to teach you about how things happened and what they did. So in Brisbane's case, things arrive in what they call a complete knockdown kit. You'll see it CKD. I've been through one at Salisbury in the 80s where Jeep had complete knockdown kits sent out from the United States. So I could certainly see in my mind's eye what Holden were doing. So these parts and panels were made at other places and sent to all of the centres, because let's face it, all of them did vehicle assembly. Excuse me. And then they were put together. And that's why there's small variations, why things can be done just a little bit differently from place to place. And I think there is no place more evident than seeing that is when you go to a Nationals. The slight variations in this and the slight variations in that, and the owner of the car, they'll say, oh, this was my granddad's car and this is stock, or it's a Survivor and yada, 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 and they'll swear black and blue that that's how it came and whatever. Or if it's a Survivor, it is what it is. But that is the slight variation, because places do what places do. And if they've got one way of doing things, well, then they've got one way of doing things. You know, it's great to even see some of the old videos whereby, you know, they pop a windscreen in a minute and a half, and you think, my goodness, that takes me an hour, because you're doing it so gently and gingerly and slowly and carefully, because you don't want to scratch it. Oh, they just put them in there and whack them with the rubber mallet, and they slide in that way and they slide in that way, and they get them all soaped in, and then they run the rope around them, and whoosh, it's all done. Whereas, you know, we're trying to build the Rolls-Royce version of Holden, so I think we have a lot to learn regarding the difference between the factory version and the Rolls-Royce versions that we actually put out. But look, what I was really wanting to do was talk about where the Holdens were framed, assembled, what happened with the body assembly, what happened with the vehicle assembly, because I've been asked the question a lot from particularly new owners and people who are new to the movement. And I think it's really important to answer questions, to help those guys with any information that they need, because let's face it, the things that we all know, we just take for granted because it is what it is, and that's what I've learned, and I've been doing it since this, or I've been doing it since that. And you don't think anything of it. However, sometimes you just got to stop and smell the roses and think, okay, well, I've been asked this question a few times, and I've also seen other people ask it as well. And so let's just talk about it for a moment. So really, today was aimed at the new owners, the new members, the newbies, to help them along the way with, you know, how you identify the codes and what they mean. Some really good books, Norm Darwin, The History of Holden since 1917, and also the series of books by the National Treasure, Don Loeffler, certainly explain this in wonderful detail. So if I can commend both of those authors to you for required reading, that certainly would go great for people's vehicle education. So today we've talked about body identification tags. Stop by our Facebook page and see what our members are posting up. We've got great support. You know, you can see stuff that comes up there by Greg and Andy and Shawnee. They're going nuts putting things up there. They're actually rivaling me now for posting. So it's terrific. Also want to thank my eldest apprentice, Nathan, for the t-shirt he made me, and also Dale from Canberra for the wonderful design that he actually came up with for me, and also his permission to use it. And also want to thank Pete too for capturing a little bit of video of me back in 1988 when I put the Nationals on in Queensland at Cleveland, and he took some footage of me in the Motorcana. I was lucky to come. I took the Motorcana that day. I was very lucky to win it in the pouring rain. But I want to thank Pete for doing that. That was just great. But I hope you've enjoyed the episode today. Look after yourself, take care, but more importantly, enjoy your Holden.